but the video I sent you is, I mean, horribly inaccurate about judo and how it pertains to mixed martial arts, street application, grappling. So I don't know, man. I just figured we kind of like talk about that.
So we are back by demand. Sergeant Brian Butler with the dad.
Sergeant,
bod.
actually,
you sergeant?
yeah, actually getting a demotion. I'm getting a demotion, actually.
Did you do something wrong?
No, actually, I'm actually going to another department. So I'm actually going to have to work my way back up to sergeant at this new department. So yeah, I'm currently leaving my rank of sergeant and moving on to greener pastures, or at least so I hope.
That's like going to like a new judo club and then having to like get demoted to brown belt and have to prove yourself as a black belt again.
Or maybe even white belt. Because I mean, I'm
yeah,
basically a patrolman. I'm a patrolman. That's the white belt of cops.
Well, he's back by demand, ladies and gentlemen, on Dad Bod podcast. It's great to see you again, Brian. Thanks for coming back on, man.
Yeah, man, I'm happy to be back. And I know there's been some things that we've been wanting to talk about. And I know that I've had some things that have come across my radar, regarding judo and also the MMA world, and also kind of combining that with a lot of the critiques that judo gets in the MMA world and in the grappling realm. And some of those critiques have come from very high places. I mean, one of the main critics of judo, at least as it pertains to the realm of mixed martial arts and grappling, one of the main sort of antagonists, so to speak, and I'm a big fan of his, is Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen has said some very negative things about judo, and also we also talked about the I sent you the video. I don't know if you had a chance to go over it, but there's this YouTube channel, young guy, and he has a lot of negative things. I think it's called Armchair Violence is the name of the YouTube channel, and seems like a nice enough channel. He's promoting good content, and he's getting clicks and views. But the video I sent you is, I mean, horribly inaccurate about judo and how it pertains to mixed martial arts, street application, grappling. So I don't know, man. I just figured we kind of like talk about that because that's a big thing, that people talk a lot about.
Yeah, I watched the video, and I got to tell you, I kind of agreed with some of the stuff he said, especially with like the street fighting and things like that.
Yeah, he wasn't wrong on everything.
No, he wasn't wrong. I mean, he was. I think it was more geared towards like, it was all negative. The video was all negative towards judo. That was his purpose to make the video. But to his credit, he did make some that I agreed with. I mean, in terms of like, the problem that I had with it was there's a discrimination between sport judo and self-defense. And as I thought about it, I was like, okay, you throw somebody, you roll through, you're on your back. Well, he's mixing different rules with different martial arts. Like jiu-jitsu has different rules than judo. Like judo's purpose is to slam them for an ippon and win. And that's pretty much about it. But yeah, of course, you're going to roll through. And once you hit their back, you make them hit their back, then you win, you roll through. That's just momentum. That makes sense. That's sport. But yeah, you throw that into a different sport. It does. Yeah, there's going to be disadvantages. I mean, and advantages too. So I don't know. Yeah. I think just like not looking at both sides of the coin and giving it context kind of bothered me. But you know what? With judo, and this, man, I mean, like, I think there's the plus side is you got a lot of ancillary athletic skill technique that gets with you, balance, power, explosiveness, all that stuff is there. I mean, you need, and judo gives you all that. So if you're looking to be able to fight, that gives you at least a good base.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the big problem that I had with like what the guy was saying And, for our listeners, if they're curious, like I said, it's called Armchair Violence. I think the video is Why Judo Sucks. You could Google that. I'm sure it'll come up. One of the things that he was saying though is I didn't like how he would say he would give an example of a deficiency that judo has, and it's like for instance, like you throw to the ground and then it's all predicated on the landing, as opposed to like what happens after the landing. Okay, fair enough. That is a deficiency that somebody who basically competed in judo rules, that's a deficiency they would have in a street fight, in terms of not really knowing what to do on the ground or throwing and then ending up in a bad spot. Okay, fair enough. But the problem is, at the same time, this kid's also defending jujitsu, where jujitsu allows you to lay on your back at the feet of your opponent. I can't think of a bigger deficiency in a street fight than to literally lay on your back and attempt to dominate your opponent by laying at his feet in a street fight. I mean, you could argue that's the worst thing to do. I mean, that's kind of a big reason why jiu-jitsu was created, in terms of like, what do you do in the worst case scenario when your opponent is bigger and stronger than you and on top of you? I mean, if you talk to any jujitsu practitioner, they'll tell you, yeah, that's what we specialize in. Okay, fair enough. But I think we can also agree that that's the last place you want to be. Jujitsu, in a lot of ways, not in all ways, but in a lot of ways, it's a last resort martial art. Again, in some ways, not in every way. But like, that's just the problem that I had with kind of what he was doing. Is he would talk about a deficiency in judo, but then ignore the fact that like every martial art, every combat sport has deficiencies. I mean, you could argue wrestling is like the same way, because he was defending wrestling a lot too, which I love. Wrestling, I love freestyle, folk style, it's great. But he's making the argument that like it's stupid to throw someone directly onto their back like in judo and then have the match be over. Well, last time I checked, like, you're pinning someone to the mat and you have their shoulders at like not quite a flat level, but like if you move just a centimeter and then get their shoulders down, now all of a sudden you've won, whereas like just a centimeter ago you didn't win. I mean, you could argue that that's kind of like arbitrary too. They all have different arbitrary rules, and they all have disadvantages. Wrestlers get caught in guillotines all the time because they drop their head and shoot for singles. Wrestlers get caught in triangle chokes and guillotines and arm bars because they don't know how to defend submissions when somebody's laying on their back. So that's a deficiency that wrestling has. Again, jiu-jitsu, they promote the idea of laying on your back in at the feet of your opponent. So that's a huge deficiency. And so it's just like the whole thing just felt like it was like very biased. You know what I mean? And it just wasn't very, like, it wasn't objectively reasonable. And a lot of things he said were actually objectively false in terms of how judo stacks up in the octagon in professional martial arts. And I actually made a little list here, Dave, and we won't get into it just yet. But I compiled a little list about how well judo players have done in MMA, and it's actually astonishing how well they've done in MMA. So we can get into that at some point, but yeah, I mean, what was being said in the video, and a lot of criticisms about judo and how it works in a street fight, just and MMA, I just don't think we're accurate.
Yeah, and you can make you can take any martial art into the same video.
Yeah, you can do that with any martial art.
Any video, I mean, any martial art. I mean, so you think about karate, right? How about sport karate? Points karate. They don't. They're not killing each other. I mean, they're getting points. So you could make that argument, like, well, if you train sport karate and you just you're going for points and not trying to blast the guy, okay, well that gives you a disadvantage. Yeah, okay, maybe if you're just trying to get points on somebody who's trying to, like, rob you, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I agree. I think what he said needed context, and it depends on what angle that you're going to go at in terms of like self-defense. And I think that, like you said, depending on what martial art you do, self-defense is appropriate in some situations, but it's self-defense is a different animal too. I mean, when you're looking at
it really is. And like another thing that he mentioned was the arbitrary nature of the rules, like how he mentioned he actually he showed a clip and it was I recognized the clip. It was from it was Dimitri Peters, a German Olympic judo player, and he was getting thrown by it was an Uzbek judo player. I can't remember his name. He's actually a referee now. You see him. He was I think a minus 100, but I recognized the clip that he showed, and basically it was the Uzbek player throwing the German player Dimitri Peters, and he hits him with this beautiful drop Seonagi, real powerful. Peters goes head over tea kettle, and he lands, but he kind of catches himself with his forearm, and he's able to avoid landing on his side or his back. But I mean, he hits the mat pretty hard as he catches himself, and then flips, and then kind of lands, kind of like a cat would, kind of like on their front. And he shows that clip, and he's like, so you're telling me this is worth no points? Oh, because he got his elbow down? Oh, that's so arbitrary, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, okay, so here's a couple things with that. First of all, number one, I don't really think it's arbitrary, because when you're throwing someone through the air and they land on their side, and their arm is pulled across their body and they're getting slammed on their side, it's a very vulnerable way to land. You're landing right on your ribs, your organs, things like that. I mean, it's an awful way to land. Probably the only way worse than that to land is either on your head or flat on your back, which is ippon. So I don't think it's arbitrary to reward that type of a throw. But let's grant him. Let's say, okay, it is arbitrary. Let's say it is stupid to award that. Not stupid, but arbitrary. Okay, again, there's just as many arbitrary rules in jiu-jitsu. Like for instance, I was thinking about this. Like if you're in an IBJJF match, okay, and a guy has you full mounted, he's on top of you, either knee is touching the mat, you're like in between his legs, he's on top of you, and either knee is touching the mat, but you have like the tip of his foot squeezed between your legs, like the tip of his foot, just a few inches of his foot squeezed in between your legs. That's still considered half guard or quarter guard, whatever they call it, even though he's completely mounted you. But you have the tip of his foot squeezed between your legs. That's no points. But then if he moves his foot just an inch and gets his foot out, now all of a sudden that's 4 points, even though the position effectively hasn't changed at all. Nothing has changed. He's still on top of you. He just moved his foot an inch. And now you're going to give him 4 points versus 0 points. That's arbitrary too. How about this one? If he has me in side control in a BJJ match, or Kesagatami, it's like scarf hold, okay, and then I flip him over and reverse him, and now I'm on top of him and I have side control, that's 0 points in jiu-jitsu. However, if he's in my guard and I'm on my back and I flip him over and end up in his guard, now that's 2 points. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so you would actually make the argument that it probably makes more sense to give me points when I reverse a bad situation, like being in Kesagatami, and then I get myself into a dominant position like side control or Kesagatami. But then if I'm in guard, I reverse him and then I end up in his guard, which could be an advantageous position for him if he's a good guard player. But then I get 2 points. But I didn't get 2 points for the other role. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you could argue that that's arbitrary too. So again, the kid was making all these like really, he was making all these biased statements about like judo, as if like all the criticisms he was saying about judo didn't then apply to like every other grappling art. It's like there's always going to be seemingly art. Going back to wrestling, it's like I said, like his shoulders can be like almost flat across the mat, and it's not a pin, but then like you move an inch and now he's perfectly flat and now it is a pin and you've won. Like like here you haven't won, here you have won. So it's like, is that arbitrary? I guess
it's just a rule. It's just different rules for different things. That's all. That's all it is. So who are the judo players that you
I have compiled a really, and it didn't take long. I mean, it's like I've been following MMA for probably since, I don't know, 2007-ish, early mid 2000s, I guess mid 2000s more, that I've been following MMA. So I've always kept an eye on judoka and stuff like that. And some of these will be like household names, people that everyone's heard, and some are lesser known, but have competed. All of these guys have competed, and girls have competed in major organizations like UFC, Pride, WEC, Bellator, PFL. They've all competed in all the major organizations or subsidiaries of the major organizations. So we'll go down the list. Akiyama, we all know Akiyama. Yoshihiro Akiyama. Ronda Rousey, Kayla Harrison, Juliana Velasquez, Bellator champion, Caro Parisian, WEC champion, Yoshida, Manny Gamburian, Olivier Mercier, PFL champion, Hector Lombard, Judo Olympian and Bellator champion, Remco Pardo, early UFC, like UFC 1, 2. You have Dan Kelly, an Olympian. You have who fought in the UFC, Dong Yong Kim, another UFC fighter, Jim Wallhead, Ben Spikers, Satoshi Ishii. He's a judo gold medalist in the Olympics. Duke Didier, who's fighting in ONE FC right now. Kevin Jose, who's fighting in the UFC. You have Rick Hahn, another judo Olympian, fought in the UFC, or no, I think he fought in Bellator. You have Jeff Lawson, he was on the Ultimate Fighter. Sako Savichian, also on the Ultimate Fighter. Savak Magakian, also on the Ultimate Fighter. Liu Kai was on the road to the UFC, I believe, or Dana White's Contender Series. Then you have Liam McCourt, fought in Bellator. Danilo Villafort, which most people around here know him because he's got a little gym. Not a little gym, it's actually a really big gym, really nice, out here in the South Hills of Pittsburgh. And then of course you got Fedor, and I want to touch on Fedor too, because in that video he said Fedor didn't count, but I want to touch on that. So obviously we got Fedor, Said Kakramanov, and Nick Hine. So these are all, and I want to be very clear about the criteria that I use to select these MMA fighters. I could have picked people that had judo backgrounds, and the list would have been unbelievable. It would have been a who's who of MMA if I picked everyone who had a judo black belt or a judo background. Like we could have been talking about Khabib Nurmagomedov. We could have been talking about Islam Makhachev. We could be talking about Valentina Shevchenko. We could be talking about going all the way back to the old days, Dawn Fry and Dan Severn.
Hey guys, I got a new coaching system that I developed. It's called the Mind Coach System. It's a 7-step process to help you reach your peak potential. We talk about dreams, we talk about goals, we talk about strategy, we talk about execution, mindset, and then reaching your peak potential. By using all of those, we can get you there, and we can develop a plan for you to be able to find your goals and to reach those and reach your peak potential. So click the link below, check it out, contact me, and then we can go from there.
So we have this whole list, and I even added up the wins-loss record of all of the MMA fighters on here, because one of the things that was mentioned in that video is that judo just isn't successful. Well, according to this list, all these judoka, they have a combined win-loss record, or I should say a win-loss record total of 371 and 134. That sounds pretty successful to me.
Yeah.
And that's not actually even including Fedor. I actually left Fedor out because there was apparently a discrepancy whether or not Fedor actually counts as a judoka. But Fedor went 40 and 70. So what does that put us at? That puts us at, or excuse me, 40 and 70, 40 and 7, excuse me.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, he definitely didn't have 70 losses, 40 and 7. So that puts us at, so that's 141 as far as the losses. And then that brings us up to 411. Yeah. So 411 wins for judokas, and only 300 and what would that be? 341 or 141 losses to 411 wins. So it sounds like judo is actually pretty successful in MMA.
Yeah.
So that pretty much debunks that. And again, I didn't include the the MMA fighters that actually have legitimate judo backgrounds, but didn't really go through the competitive architecture. I only selected like the pure judoka, and see the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, and that could be argued even more, considering that judo is a grappling sport. It has submissions, it has throws, it has almost everything, and it has a standing game and the ground game.
Mm-hmm.
So the transition from from that to a more of a fighting style of MMA, where you're now you throw in like punches and kicks, you don't really have to add much more. You already got the grappling, and if you train and you add a little bit of jujitsu in there, and it's the transition's easy there, and obviously the transition's pretty easy with the punches and kicks too for the guys, because most of those guys can punch and kick as well.
Well, right, because it gets back to what you said before about what judo gives, that wrestling does also, but not so much with jujitsu. And I'm sorry, I might tick off some jujitsu guys, and they might heel hook me. But jujitsu doesn't have it doesn't condition its athletes to have this real athletic, explosive power. I'm not saying that every jujitsu player doesn't have that. Some do, but typically you see that more with judo players and wrestlers that requires this real explosive athleticism, which is why I think you don't see a lot of like 40-year-old dads, that have never competed in anything, just walk into a judo club and say, "Hey, I want to do this." Not that there's anything wrong with that. We certainly welcome anybody that would want to come in, if you're 40, 50, whatever, and you want to come in, even if you never competed in anything, that's great. We'd love to have you. But that demographic seems to be more gravitating towards jujitsu. Why? Because it doesn't require, I want to be careful here because I don't want to insult BJJ, because I have a lot of respect for a lot of BJJ players, but it doesn't require as much athleticism. It just doesn't. You can be someone who's not really that athletic, but maybe you're a little flexible, and you can go in there and you can be successful. But with judo, I mean, you have to be pretty explosive and pretty athletic.
I think the explosiveness, when you get older and you come into a sport like judo, is an issue, because you have to condition yourself. The explosiveness and the flexibility and power and all that stuff, that takes time to train. And there's a lot of coordination too. I mean, you're on your feet and you have to be coordinated. You got to be explosive. You have to use a lot of plyometric movements. You got to turn, you have to do a lot of different stuff simultaneously. Now, it's a fast game. Like it's fast, not to mention the gripping and the pulling and the balance and all the other stuff. Yeah, that takes some time. So that's why kids transitioning from when you do it as a kid to an adult is a heck of a lot easier, because first of all, you have experience. Secondly, you've kind of learned how to do that, not to mention falling. I mean,
Oh yeah.
falling for an adult sucks. I mean,
Oh yeah.
even like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, even now at my age, I mean, I'm not a real fan of falling all the time either. Especially now, if I had you throwing me or somebody, maybe a high level throwing me, that's a different story, because I get thrown cleanly. But you get thrown wrong and you can't recover like you did when you were 10. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's
Oh yeah.
kind of like there's some liability there in terms of like you can get hurt if you're not careful, and you try to do things too quickly. But I think the difference is it's on your feet. It's more powerful in terms of like plyometric movement and all the other coordination that I talked about before. But also it's not, you can't do it in a slow way. Like judo, you can do judo in 100 different ways. Competitively, obviously, you can do recreationally, or if you want to dabble in it and just kind of play around and try techniques, and
Yeah.
it has something for everybody, not to mention the kata and things like that. So yeah, if you're a 40-year-old dad or mom who wants to try judo, sure, that's not a problem, but you got to do it in the right way. You got to come in and
Yeah.
you got the right class and instructor to be able to say, okay, you need to do this. We're going to keep you here, because if not, you're going to get hurt. You could get hurt. because we don't want you over here, trying to blast somebody. We want to take things very, very slowly until you build your muscle memory and strength and coordination and speed and stamina. And then from there, you can actually do the sport. But not everyone's going to compete. Not everyone's going to randori. Not everyone's going to like do weird throws. It's just you have to be smart about it. And I think that's the problem with judo. It's so competitively driven, and not that I get
Yes, I was going to say that. Yeah.
that it's like you gotta go full tilt, and it's like no, you don't have to go full tilt. You have to. It's a gradation of skill and culture in the club to make sure that everybody has fun with it, and make it an exercise. Like it's actually exercise. So
Mhm.
make it that way so you become fit and fun and make it fun.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just getting ready to say that it's very competition driven, whereas jujitsu is not. I mean, it's still, I think with jujitsu, there's a lot more hobbyists that just go, hey, I just do this for a hobby. And I think one of the reasons why I think is because, um, you know, you can do jujitsu in a little more like, for lack of a better way, for lack of a better word, rather, like a more subtle way. Like you can kind of just like after work, you can just go, you can go to open mat, you can kind of do some rolls, and you can wake up the next morning and you're pretty much okay. And granted, I know jujitsu can get rough, and I know injuries can happen and things like that. But compared to judo, like I'm sorry, like when you're around 40 years of age, which I know, which I am, um, you don't just wake up after a hard randori session and just go about your day and feel fine. I'm telling you, it hurts, and we all know that.
Mhm.
Like it is, I don't just wake up and I'm like, oh yeah, like I feel fresh, I feel great. You know, like when I did jujitsu, I did. Now, granted, I was younger, but if you talk to anybody who's older doing jujitsu, who's also done judo, they'll tell you like the impact on the body, um, is just it's so much it's so much greater. And especially like someone like me who like I haven't gotten to that point yet where I'm like, okay, I need to just slow down and not compete and go full bore on randori the way that I did when I was in my 20s or even early 30s. um I haven't got there yet. I'm still going with the young bucks. Me and Tanner still go head up. Like, Tanner's almost a decade younger than me. Actually, I think he's more than a decade younger than me. Big Andrew, the former NFL, NCAA uh, edge rusher, linebacker. I mean, he's got like 3 years of judo under his belt now. I think 2 years of jujitsu, or a year of jujitsu, and then like 2 years of judo now. Plus, he was an outside linebacker. I mean, and he's like 23. He's
Yeah.
just nothing but muscle and explosive energy.
Mhm.
So to like keep up with him, even though my experience is much greater than him, to try and keep up with someone that young and that fast and that strong, is hard. you
Yeah.
know, and it takes a toll on the body. It really does.
And I think with that too, using judo as a recreational sport, as an exercise, and to be smart about it. I know if I don't feel it, man, I'm not gonna do it. Like I'm not gonna randori. Like
Mhm.
some days I feel great. It's like, man, I can do this. And then some days I'm like, you know what? And the older you get, the smarter you get, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
So you learn about your body really quickly, and I'm like, okay, I can do this today. And if I don't, man, I don't. I'm like, I got nothing to prove. I just like let me just move around a little bit. If it's not randori, it's gonna be grip fighting. If it's not grip fighting, it's gonna be moving around doing promise throwing or something like that. So it's like, be smart about it. And the older you get, use judo as an exercise and not to and get rid of the ego. I think that was the hardest thing for me coming back to judo for a while, was like I still had like the competitive spirit. I was like, oh man, you can't throw. I don't want to get thrown in practice, and it's like that's stupid because it's
See,
like
I'll be honest. If I'm being honest, I still have that. Like if I'm being, I mean, at 39 years of age, I don't know if I'm like super proud of that, but there's a part of me that is, and there's a part of me that isn't, if that makes any sense. Whereas like I still have that. Like when Tanner and I go, like it's like, yeah, we're both trying to win. And you know, like the other day, like I had a couple really good throws on Tanner, a couple good ippons, and I went back and went for a Yoko Wakari, tried to get up underneath him. He sprawled on it, stuffed it, and just smashed me and pinned me. And it was like, and like in my mind, I'm like, oh man, I lied. And then I was like, I got to get that one back, you know. And again, I still have that, I admit, and it's I guess it's not it old habits die hard, I guess is kind of the moral of that story there. I still have a very a big competitive nature in me, and I always want to win, and I think as I get older though, that's going to start to get smaller and smaller. But
Yeah.
I always try and give it my all. And the thing, I don't have the gas tank that I used to either.
Mhm.
I got like 2 or 3 good rounds in me, if that. And then like, if you ask me to go after like 3 randoris, I'm like, dude, I need to at least sit 1 or 2, or I'm completely done.
Yeah.
I just don't have the gas tank that I used to.
Yeah. Like you said, these young guys coming up, they're in such good shape, and it's like, okay, let me go with them. I just want to make sure, like, if I'm gonna get thrown around cleanly. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of which, how are you feeling?
I'm getting better.
Yeah.
Better. If you guys didn't know, I broke my leg at judo practice. I was actually helping one of the guys for he was Andre. We talked about him my last podcast. He just went to the World Championships actually yesterday, um, and I was helping him train. Brian and I both were helping him train for the tournament. He wanted to do the stand up game, so we had to give him some looks and show him some techniques, some gripping and things like that. And when we were going at it in practice and going through some rounds, randori and doing some things, and he hit my leg too high, and I broke my fibia. So I'm in a cast right now, boot. So I'm healing. So I'll have a few months to kind of get myself back up and running to get back on the map. But right now it's healing. So, but it's a pain. It's a
I know,
pain.
man. No, that's a bummer, and I know, we all felt bad about that. I know Andre felt terrible about it, and it's one of those things. I don't know that it's. I mean, I wasn't there, but I don't think it was anybody's fault. It's just those things happen. I've been on both ends of that. I've been on the side where I was the one that got hurt, and I was the one where I accidentally hurt somebody, and both feel awful. I mean, they really do. I was years ago. The club's not around anymore, so I'll mention it. It was Dave Shim's club over at Lawrenceville,
Mhm.
and me and my buddy Quincy were doing some randori, and I had him in like a Russian tie, like a 2-on-1,
Yeah.
and then I went underneath for my Yoko Wakare, and at some point, I don't know, our arms sort of like interconnected, and his arm kind of went in between mine and like my chest. And then so he sprawled on the Yoko Wakare, but I still ended up rotating him over. But as I rotated him over, his arm got like pinched in between like mine and my chest, like,
Mm-hmm.
and then his forearm, like I heard it and felt it just snap. It was like
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sounded like a tree branch. It was
Yeah.
awful. It was the most horrible sound. And then I rolled under, and like I said, I heard it, you
Mm.
know, and his hand was just sitting there shaking, and I
Yeah.
was like, dude, are you doing that? He's like, no, I'm not doing that. It's just doing this. I
Yeah.
was like, are you okay? He's like, I don't know. He's like, my arm's numb. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh man, and so it turns out it was broken. He was in a cast, and like I felt terrible. I felt
Yeah.
awful. And but it was just one of those freak things. His arm kind of slipped and twisted in a certain way and got tangled up with mine. And then when we landed, the force just,
Yeah.
it broke his arm. And then I've been on the receiving end of it, where I was doing a randori session, and then the guy went for a like a sacrifice throw, like some sort of tomonage or something, and then went for like a like a de la hiva. I don't know if you're familiar with that position. It's like it's almost like a kawazu gake, but if you were in guard. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like you're laying on your back and you kind of kawazugake, but from the bottom, it's like a backwards kawazugake, I guess. And so my leg was like kind of tangled up in there, and then I like went to go pin him, and then he turned, and then like as he turned, like all this pressure went on the side of my knee, and my knee just went. "Brrrt." That's what I
Mm,
heard. It was like a like tearing like notebook paper,
yeah,
out of a spiral notebook, you
yeah,
know, and my knee just tore. And I ended up with a torn LCL.
yeah.
So yeah, I get it. It sucks, man. I'm sorry that happened. Like I said, I've been on both ends of it, and it's terrible.
No, first broken bone. Been doing this for wrestling and judo for 40 years. And
Really,
first
first broken
broken,
bone.
I've hurt my back, I've hurt my shoulder, just wear and tear stuff. But yeah, I've been super lucky, man. I've been
Yeah,
ridiculously lucky. And yeah, it's you got it when you're training, man, you get those sacrifice techniques and those spinning under things, you gotta know what you're doing, and you make
yeah, yeah. You really
make
do.
mistakes, you know.
You really do. I mean, that's like sometimes Tanner and I will drill certain throws, and I'll go over something, and I'll try some sort of like kataguruma or something like that, and or some sort of drop, and and there's been times where I told Tanner, I said, I'm only going to do that with you. I'm not going to do that on a lower belt.
Yeah,
Because I know that you and I can, when we're randoring and when we're drilling, we know how to flow. We know, which way to move, and we just have a feel for it.
yeah,
But the the lower belts, they just kind of don't, and it's not their fault. It's just I was like that when I was a lower belt. You don't have the same feel. You don't know how to react, and then that's usually when
well, you
injuries happen.
don't you also don't know when you're in a bad position too.
Right, right,
You know
right,
what I
right.
mean? You just don't
Yeah.
know. You just do the technique and then you get caught up in it. Um, I had a buddy of mine. He actually we were enduring and he caught me. He lifted me up and he spun me, and I was literally inverted where my head was here, my feet were here, and stupid me reached for the mat.
Oh no.
And he saw my hand touch the mat, and he took me and he lifted me back up and he put me on my feet, and he began to yell. He came to yell at me. He was like, "You're an idiot."
Yeah.
Yeah, he turned me upside down. He saw my hand touch the mat with my arm, and he stopped. He picked me back up, and he flipped me back on my feet. And he was like, "You're an idiot. Like, don't you ever do that again." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Man, talk about control. You can't get any more control than that." I mean,
No.
this guy was a national champion. I mean, he was so good at judo. And thank God he had more control than anybody. I mean, if he can throw me and then stop the throw and put me back on my feet, that's a good judo player.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, the injuries are few and far in between with judo anyway. I mean, it's yeah, they really don't. It doesn't. It sounds worse than it is. They get worst case scenarios with that type of thing, but for the most part, um, it's a combat sport. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Grappling. If any type of combat sport like this, you're gonna have injuries from a wide variety of things that happen to you. So some are going to be worse than others. Some are going to be minor. So
Yeah, and I think relative to most sports, I think judo is pretty safe. I mean, when you see some of the injuries that happen in hockey or in football, especially when it comes to like the head trauma and stuff like that, thankfully, you don't see a whole lot of that in judo. I mean, I know it does happen, but when you watch like IJF international tournaments and things like that, you don't typically see someone getting slammed and concussed. I don't know if I've ever seen that in an IJF tournament. I'm sure it's happened, but in the years that I've been following international judo, I don't know that I've ever seen it.
it's amazingly rare if you think about it.
Yeah.
Just can slam like that. But
Yeah.
with the way the sport's designed, so it's way the falling and throwing and the way things are done. It's pretty amazing. It's an interesting sport, no doubt.
Yeah, I agree, and I love it. I love it to death, and that's why I will defend it until the day I die. And so, when I hear, even if it's some, if it's some little young kid on some YouTube channel or something like that, yeah, I'm gonna say something about it. Or if it's Chael Sonnen, which he's had a lot to say about judo.
Hey,
And
look, look, if that young man wants to come on the podcast and talk to us, I would
yeah,
love to debate him. We could
no,
debate.
that would actually be really cool.
That's
But
and
still,
that's and that's why you're on Dad Bod Judo channel.
that's why.
That's right.
That's why I was made for this. That's why they want me back.
That's
I was
exactly
made
right.
for this channel, right?
Yeah.
So,
Hey, look, most of my audience, believe it or not, I think are between like 30 and 55. Like
oh,
it's
really?
yeah. There's some young. It's younger than I thought. There's
That is fairly young. Yeah, that is
yeah.
fairly young.
hmm
Okay, that's
Yeah.
really
So,
cool. So yeah, like I said, I'll always defend judo. And I think it's a great martial art. And I'm one of the few people that actually kind of defends the IJF too. Not to get, I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast on IJF rules, so I don't want to get into all that.
yeah.
But I do think for the most part, the IJF has got it right. I think the what they award, what they don't award, and things like that, I think is legitimate. You can argue that there are some inconsistencies and things that are like arbitrary, but as we pointed out before, you have positions in wrestling and positions in jujitsu that are completely arbitrary, and similar positions and similar techniques
Yeah.
don't get any points, and others do that are almost the same. So you have that in any martial art, any particularly combat grappling.
Yeah. And
Um,
even like
yeah.
Nikki UNESCO on his
Oh
channel,
yeah.
he had a real good video on he was talking about the rules after his kid came back from the Olympics, and it was like I thought it was well said. Like he had arguments for a lot of that, and kind of made sense. And we can disagree with all that, and the rules change. But related to what the gentleman was saying on his YouTube channel, yeah, I think it was just within context, and I think if you put it, you can frame it any way you want, that to make it sound, and like I said, any martial art can be framed that way. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly. And the examples he was giving about why like judo always loses to wrestling, and loses to jujitsu and stuff, like he was just cherry picking, like because I can go online and I can cherry pick too. Like if you go on, like Edward Triple, the German Olympic judoka, he's on the German judo team. Edward Triple, maybe you've heard of him. He's pretty good. I think he's minus 81 guy, I think. But on his YouTube channel, he has a list. It's a YouTube video, and it's titled Judo versus, I think, Judo versus other martial arts, or Judo versus every other martial art, or something like that. It's on his YouTube channel, and it's like he's got like lists on he's got like a list of videos, and it's like judo versus boxing, judo versus BJJ, judo versus wrestling, and it's like all these videos of judo players defeating other practitioners of other disciplines. So
hmm
you could just as easily go to Edward Triple's YouTube page or channel, and you could find things that would corroborate the idea that judo is more successful. And then one more quick thing, there's a list that I made of all these different judokas that have beat wrestlers in um in MMA and in grappling tournaments. We could go the original one. It's amazing that this kid didn't even realize this. The original jujitsu versus judo match, like arguably the first one, or at least the first one that got a ton of notoriety, was Masahiko Kimura versus Helio Gracie. We all know that one. That's
hmm
that's where, and we all know how that ended.
yeah,
Kimura threw Gracie on his face and broke his arm, so, or maybe threw him on his back. I'd have to go back and watch. It was a while since I've seen it, but yeah, Kimura threw him on the ground and snapped his arm. So judo won that one. And then you can go back, you can find Satoshi Ishii versus Frank Mir. Satoshi Ishii wins that one. You have Yoshida versus Royce Gracie won the first time they fought. Yoshida Ezekiel choked him. There was some controversy there, but Yoshida was absolutely smashing him. He was crushing his face with an Ezekiel choke. Absolutely outgrappled him. You have Leah McCourt in Bellator went against Sarah McMahon. Leah McCourt, judo black belt, against Sarah McMahon, Olympic wrestler. She actually hit her with a makikomi. and then got her into like a scarf hold, and then I think ended up she submitted her. I forget what she submitted her with, but and then you have Ronda Rousey also against Sarah McMahon, out grappled her, pummeled under, got double underhooks, and then delivered a knee and knocked her out with a knee strike. That was Ronda totally out grappled her. Chael versus Fedor. Chael completely just got bombed by Fedor with judo throws and reversals. Misha Tate versus Ronda. Then Misha Tate versus Ronda again. Misha Tate, very well known for her wrestling, so much so that her nickname is Takedown. And all the takedowns she went for against Ronda, Ronda reversed her every time in both of those fights. One that most people probably don't know about, Dan Kelly was an Olympic judoka. He beat Rashard Evans. Rashard Evans, very well known for his wrestling. And Dan Kelly beat him. And then Akiyama beat Sakuraba. And Sakuraba was very well known as a catch wrestler, a collegiate wrestler out of Japan, things like that. And Akiyama absolutely just demolished him. So there's a list a mile long of judo players that have beat wrestlers and jiu-jitsu guys. So we could play this game all day long back and forth on who beats who. But the way that this young man presented it, that it's just so one-sided, is just not true. I mean, between the list of judokas that have been successful in MMA and the impressive, 400 some wins to 100 and some losses, that's a pretty good collective record for judoka and MMA. And then, as I just listed, all these examples of judokas defeating wrestlers and grapplers in MMA and in grappling matches. So, like you said, you could do this with either martial art. And the way that the young man in the YouTube channel, the way that he presented it, like it was so one-sided that judo always loses, is complete nonsense, and it's not bared out by any facts.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what people think about what we talked about and what that young man talked about on his channel. So I'm really curious to get some feedback off of this podcast and see what people thought or think. And yeah, judo's a great sport. I know that we're totally biased.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, we are totally biased, and we admittedly
That's
so.
true.
And when you love it like we do and millions of others, you kind of want to defend it too. So, but yeah, Brian, again, man, this is great to have you back on. It's always so informative to have you here. So I want to thank you again.
Yeah.
If you haven't checked out our other podcast we did, it's called Why Cops Need Judo.
They do.
Yeah, and that was wonderful. That was an in-person one. We really had fun with that one. So check that one out. I'll put that one in the description. You can click on that and check that one out. Any parting thoughts about judo or life or whatever?
I don't know, but look, I will say one thing. I'm not completely biased. Look, there's a Sambo medal up here somewhere. Like I gotta look, there's my USA Sambo national medal. So I've competed in Sambo as well. So much respect to Sambo, which, let's just be honest, Sambo is just judo in little tiny shorts. So
those dudes are pretty tough though, man.
Oh yeah, trust me, don't I know it? Don't I know it? Online, somewhere out there online at the Philadelphia Sambo Open, there is a video of me getting absolutely hurled through the air by a Belarusian, I think is how you pronounce that. But either way, he was from Belarus, and he absolutely just launched me through the air. He had a big, you know how those Eastern Bloc boys do it. You've been around the block, no pun intended. You know they like to go around the back, get that belt, and send you flying. Yep. And somewhere on the internet there is a video of me getting taken for a ride by a big Belarusian boy.
Fantastic athletes, man.
So don't I know it? Yeah.
All right. So if you haven't, comment below, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and click that notification bell. And Brian, thank you very much for coming back on the show. We really appreciate it, and we will have you back very, very soon. So thank you very much.
You got to.
All right.
Judo rules.